Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Christy Stratus, historical suspense and historical fantasy author, and my awesome co hosts are epic fantasy author Richard H. Stevens and sci fi author David M. Kelly. Lurking for Legends is an interactive broadcast, so we encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or just comment on what you hear in the show. We love reading comments and showing them on the screen, so feel free. Tonight, we have co-authors, and they do things independently as well, but co-authors and co-hosts for their podcast. Meg, oh, I should have asked you, Meg, how to pronounce this. I am so sorry if I messed this up. Hafdahl, am I right?
Yeah, great.
And Kelly Florence, so glad you are both here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Yes, welcome to the show.
What did you say, Richard?
I said, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. Yes. So let's start with each of you telling us a little bit about yourselves, maybe a little bit about your independent selves and like your together selves because you work together. So let's start with you, Meg.
Sure. So I started out writing short stories for anthologies, all horror. And then I was able to work with Inklings Publishing, a small publishing house out of Houston. And they have published 3 short story collections that I wrote, as well as 3 novels. And I also write for audio plays, screenplays, etc. And then I'll let Kelly explain what we write together.
Fantastic.
Yes, we started a podcast together 5 years ago. I'm a communications professor, and Meg was a literature major. And so every week we were talking about horror movies that we loved, and we started delving into the real history, science, culture, and lore behind our favorite horror movies. And then that led into writing our nonfiction series, The Science of, and now we're currently writing our 6th book in the series together.
Wow.
That is really something. That's so cool. And I love that you both do things independently. And you actually have kind of different, I don't really think this is the right word, but sort of specialties, things that you're, really good at. One of you is a Bram Stoker nominated person. Sorry. My words aren't coming to me tonight. And and the other is, very strong in communications. And that must benefit you, right? Those different strengths. Both of you have different strengths.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly is the communicating queen, so that's really great for me as a partner. And yeah, I mean, Kelly also loves like theater, and she comes with a background of directing and things like that. And I am a huge like book nerd, and I come with all my little Shirley Jackson references. So I think we come at things, very much differently, but then also the same. Like we also say that we share a brain. So I think it's a good amount of both. The difference and similarities.
And the fun thing is we were Bram Stoker nominated together for our book, The Science of Women in Horror. And we happen to be best friends. We met 22 years ago this summer. And so to be able to do this dream job with your best friend, it's amazing.
That's so cool. Wow. I love hearing
amazing,
that.
Yeah. And I love the segue where you said, do you share a brain? Because that almost seems horror-esque.
Yeah.
So I was going through the website and looking at your books, and it's The Science of Stephen King. I pulled that one up, and as an independent author, you guys aren't independently published. You guys are published through different presses and that. But I noticed that you have over 1,000 reviews on that book. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Like, the big hitters have 1,000 reviews. Us minor people, we're happy we get 50 and we get our unicorn, but. How do you guys get so many reviews? You got that many followers that's amazing.
I think for as the Science of Stephen King, obviously the power of Stephen King is huge. We were able, that book came out in the height of the pandemic, so we weren't able to like get out and do a lot of physical signings or things like that. But we did do a lot of online events and things like that. And I think that people at that time, were looking for things to read. And so I think it would just hit at the right moment. And we've had so much great success with that. And that's one of the reasons we're writing The Science of Agatha Christie right now, even though she's quite different than Stephen King. People who read want to read about the books that they love to read. So it works out really well. And we're really lucky and happy that the Stephen King book and all of our books are really resonating with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So, could you tell us? I mean, obviously, you're both kind of into horror anyway. So, how did that kind of like interest develop in both of you?
So I know ever since I was little, I loved scary things. I remember hearing the story of Bigfoot when I was in the first grade, and a lot of my classmates were terrified. And I got home and I went immediately into the woods to try to find him. And my dad saw that and he gave me my first VHS, which was Night of the Living Dead, and I never turned back. And I know Meg had a similar childhood upbringing.
Yeah. I had, well, yes, I loved horror movies. I really loved true crime. That's something that I was really intrigued by. And I found a book by that was about Ed Gein at a library sale. And I remember having that, and it had pictures in it. It's probably very inappropriate for my age, but I loved that book. And I remember I was taking it with me to a babysitting job, and my mom was like, no, let's not bring that babysitting. We don't want them to get the wrong. So I've always been a macabre little child, and finding Kelly, we were able to connect there because we were growing up before the internet and things like that, so we weren't able to find our horror people, especially another woman who loved horror. And so it just was natural that it became our career because we were talking about it, consuming it, loving it, and it's one of the things that we share. So taking that, and then also that we're nerds and we like to do research and we like to talk about literature and feminism and all these things, it was a natural kind of magnetized connection.
Wow.
I find the genre of horror amazing, and I find it for myself. Like, I'm one of those people. I remember seeing Jaws in the '70s, and I had this spring coat on it, and I had this little vent at the back for airflow, and that's how I watched the whole movie. I turned the coat around and I put that coat over my head, and I looked through this little vent, and I was like this, and you could always tell that something was going to happen when the music started going dun dun dun. But there was the one scene where that white head comes out of the bottom of this boat, and you had no idea it was coming when someone was diving. I pretty well ran screaming out of the theater when that happened. So I was just wondering, like, horror scares the heck out of me all the time, and I can't watch it just because I'm too chicken. Like, are you like this when you're watching the shows? Or are you just like, wow, this is awesome, and you're just eating your popcorn?
That's the thing I love about horror is that it makes me viscerally feel things. I love to be able to hold that blanket up and I'm watching through my fingers. There's nothing better than that. I was actually watching a movie for last week for the podcast, and I had to turn it off and finish it the next morning because it scared me so much. And so what else makes me feel that way but horror?
Yeah, I think we're just the weirdos who we really like that feeling. Like it's kind of like my 15-year-old loves to go on roller coasters. I hate roller coasters. I don't want to be on a thrill ride. But for me, like watching a horror movie, that's a thrill ride. So I think everyone has those things that they like that's different. And I agree. I love when I have to hide my face.
Do you not get nightmares? Do neither of you get nightmares?
Sometimes, but not like night terrors or anything.
No, okay. And I'll just call it inspiration. We'll just say inspiration for what we're gonna write next.
Oh my goodness, that's
admirable. Farther, sorry, Chrissy. Do you guys give yourself nightmares?
Yeah, I think sometimes we can definitely work up an idea, and it's like, okay, that's creepy, and it's like, stop talking about that. Yeah.
I think that's the ultimate gift. When you kill a character in your books and you create empathy and you actually cry when you actually read and edit your own stuff. I think that's the biggest compliment. If you can give yourself nightmares as a horror author, I think that's
Yes,
definitely. Yeah, that leads perfectly into something I was wondering, Richard, which is basically just how can you two tell when something is scary? And I ask that because like things are different for everyone, of course. There's different kinds of horror. There's like body horror and serial killer horror and all kinds of stuff. And it's kind of the same actually on the opposite end of the spectrum, humor. Like how can somebody tell it's definitely funny? So yeah, how do you both tell that something is, this is it. This is really scary?
Well, I think there's like an emotionality to it. I think with being funny too, like there has to be something relatively true about it and something like emotional that kind of like makes you care. And I think that humor, you're right, it's very similar. And with horror, I feel like, and I've always said when I write like my fiction, you have to care about the person going through the dark woods, or you're not really going to, because we've all seen the slashers where the girl's running and she, maybe she gets stabbed by Jason or whatever. And maybe that moment doesn't really resonate because we don't really care. She's more of a trope than a real character. She we haven't got to know her. So I think for me personally, like I need to have that emotional, like visceral feeling of, oh no, I don't want something bad to happen to them. And I put myself in their shoes. That's I don't know, what would you say, Kelly?
And I would say connecting to the world in some way. It doesn't need to necessarily be rooted in realism, but somehow we're connecting to these characters or this place or this time. And even if there's a strange creature flying out of the sky, I'm going to be scared because I was brought into this world and I believe it.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's like for me, whenever I see anything where there's kind of like a group of teens that get lost, like in the woods or whatever, it's like I'm always rooting for the monster. Yeah, it's like honestly,
get
it's
them.
like, absolutely, yeah. Get rid of them.
Yeah.
So just curious, not that I want you guys to scare your better halves going forward, but when you guys are writing these scenes and you invest, like you say, in your character and you get us, the readers, to start empathizing with the character and we don't want anything to happen to them, and then you kill them and dismember them and do all this. Do you enjoy doing that? Is this something that you thrive on, or how's that go? Like,
no, I get really like, I get torn up. I get upset because if I've like brought them that far, then I care about them too. And so no, I mean, there have been moments where I got really upset because I'm like, yeah, this person has to go, and it's like this internal struggle of, yeah, this person has to go. I don't want to make them go, but it's time. And no, I get upset. I get a little sad.
I think sometimes though we've created characters in our screenplays where it's like, I can't wait for this person to get it. Like, okay, we created them in order for this moment.
Yeah, that's true too.
That's so funny. Is there anything like that, any trope or anything at all that you kind of feel is like totally dead that you would just never really write about? Or is there anything that's like too far for you, something you wouldn't want to touch on?
Oh, wow. Good question. For me, I don't think there's any trope that you can't revitalize and like put your own spin on. I know, like, I grew up loving zombies. I'm a huge George Romero fan, and I didn't want to write a zombie story for that reason, just because I felt like, well, what am I going to add to zombies? But my dad and my brother, and my husband, they were all like, oh my gosh, you love zombies. You have to write a zombie story. And so I kind of was listening to them. And then I got inspiration of how to kind of put my own spin on it. And I wrote a story, and it was a successful story called Dust. And I'm really proud of it. And I'm so glad I did it. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't write about. I think nowadays in horror, there's talk about trigger warnings, and I think it's really important to just like keep those in mind. And if you are going to write about something that is upsetting, to sort of have in your mind that you might want to warn a certain population of people and or everyone. But no, I don't think there's anything like off limits. What about you, Kelly?
Well, I was thinking about my two favorite things in life are musicals and horror movies. And growing up, I was like, there's no way that these two things can go together. But of course, I found out as I've gotten older that there's Evil Dead, the musical. There's Carrie, the musical, which I had the opportunity to stage manage. There's Beetlejuice, the musical. And there's all sorts of other not adapted for stage, just for screen. And so that's my dream, is horror musicals. They even adapted The Shining right here in my home state of Minnesota for the opera. So if they can do that, we can do anything.
I love it.
Is it still creepy?
Yeah, and it was the Minnesota Opera. It was a big deal. So
I bet that might actually make me want to go see the opera.
Yeah,
I know, right?
I'm not an opera fan, and I shouldn't say this, but I don't read horror. But I think that might make me go to see it, just because I don't read horror only because I'm afraid. I don't think I'd sleep at night, and not because I don't appreciate the genre. And one thing I wanted to touch on before we lose train of thought here is that people always ask me if I model my characters after people that I know. And then I'm thinking about you guys, and and what you guys can do to those characters. And so I can see the benefits of writing this genre, because I know where I used to work, there were people there that I would just love to inflict a horror scene on them. You never actually do it in real life, but it'd be nice to write that in a book. Do you guys find yourself ever doing that, or you don't want to comment on that?
That would be creepy if I just said no comment. No, I think that I think for me, if I know I'm gonna like kill somebody off and stuff, it's more like personality traits that I don't like, and not necessarily like a specific person, but just a jerk that has the things about him or her that I don't like. I did write one character that I think resembles my husband, and he's still alive after 3 novels. So that's pretty good, but I don't know
but not in real life. Just kidding, he's alive.
Yeah. In all lives. Yeah. So
yeah, same thing.
How I am. Yeah.
Well, as I've written fiction too, I remember this experience, and so it's a type of person. It's not, a person in general. But I think too, we always try to write relatable characters, things that we know about ourselves, but also not to be just a trope of a person. We want a lot of our characters are female, and we want them to be complicated and real, and not just black and white. There's somewhere in between.
So I have a question, kind of for Meg, but actually for both of you. And that is, Meg, some of your writing has been compared to the Wayward Pines series by Blake Crouch, and also which is like set in a small town. And then you've got a lot of Stephen King's works which are set in small towns. And so I was just wondering what you both think. What is it about small towns that makes them such perfect settings for mystery and horror?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in big cities. So a small town is kind of a novelty to me. And the first time I sort of experienced being in small towns, I felt a difference. I felt like there was something sort of perfect, but also unattainable. Like I was on the outside. And I mentioned I love Shirley Jackson. I love people who sort of play with that rural gothic and, what's happening, the seedy underbelly beneath this perfect looking town where everybody looks like they're just having a great time and everybody knows each other. But then there's something kind of creepy about everybody knowing each other. So everything kind of has that push and pull. And I mean, obviously there's great urban horror that I love too. I mean, horror can happen anywhere, but I don't know, there's just something extra creepy about the country at night. And Kelly, I know, she grew up in a tiny town. So
yes.
She knows.
So I grew up in the country, and my high school, my K through 12 graduating class of 30. And so just like Meg was saying, you do know every single person, their family, where they live. And from an inside perspective, when people walk into that diner out in the middle of nowhere and everybody turns to look at you, we're turning to look because we probably know you. And so for strangers or outsiders, it's like, oh no, I don't belong here. But from my perspective, it was like, oh, it's probably somebody I know. And so learning that different perspective as we write together, and knowing that we come from different upbringings and bringing our experiences together to write fiction or nonfiction, it's been a joy.
Mm-hmm. Do you have, both of you, this is to each of you individually, do you have like one movie, book, or even musical that you kind of hold up for yourself as like, this is the perfect piece. This is it,
Oh, wow. That's a hard question. I don't know if there's like one particular thing. I know when I was a teenager, I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and it's a beautiful novel, and her sense of setting was it's like a romantic suspense novel, and it was just so epic, and it really made me want to write like dark literature. And every day I'm like, why can't I be as subtle and understated as Shirley Jackson? Because I love gore. I love blood. I'm not going to lie. And Shirley Jackson had a way of describing things so subtly. And so sometimes I'll say to myself, maybe be a little more subtle, Meg, like Shirley Jackson. So I guess those are the things I tell myself.
And I know growing up, I really loved horror comedy. And so Evil Dead 2 was one of my favorite movies in high school. I ended up naming my son Campbell after Bruce Campbell. But what Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell and everybody on that film did was they took a very low budget concept and just using practical effects made people laugh out loud and scared the pants off of them. And I think that that's our goal.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great.
Has your son got a chainsaw for a hand?
You know, he was able to meet Bruce now like 10 years ago, and they got their picture together, and it's so epic, and I can't wait to recreate it someday.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, you know, speaking of these kinds of, you know, different influences, you have in movies, it's, I think, at least, easier to scare people. You have jump scares and you have that creepy darkness and people slowly going, you know, you have the visuals and it's, you know, pretty easy to create a jump scare or whatever you're trying to do, create that atmosphere really. But in a book, what are some of the most like challenging kinds of things that you're doing? Because like with horror, you have to approach it. It's like when you're writing it, it's almost approaching it in a way that with the words, it's just not the same as visually. And I think personally, from what I've read, I would find it more of a challenge, much more of a challenge to write it well than to make a movie of it well. What do you find challenging about writing horror?
Well, I think for me, like, I know transitioning from fiction to screenplay was hard because Kelly, with her theater background, and she has more TV and film background than I do, she sees things very visually. And for me, like when we would write our scripts, I wanted to write them like a book. And I wanted to put in a lot of adjectives and pretty words and set up the setting and everything. And that's not really how it goes. And so I know for me, it was kind of a transition. But when I'm writing in books, I think what I love about it, and it is challenging, but it's so fun, is the psychological aspect that maybe you can't do in a film. I mean, you can show somebody like freaking out and all that stuff, but there's something even just being in their mind. I'm reading And Then There Were None right now by Agatha Christie. Working on our Agatha Christie book. There's a movie that came out in like, I think the 40s or 50s of it. And I love that version, but I was thinking, oh, you really can't get into their heads like in this novel. And isn't that always the case? So while I love The Shining by Stephen King, I also love Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. They're two very different things. But yeah, I think the psychological aspect is what makes it so fun and challenging and just really rewarding.
Yeah, I think that absence of knowing the motivation sometimes for the villain or anybody, it leaves that space to be even more terrifying, because if we can't understand it, I think that that's scarier than everything explained in a villain monologue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So on your Science In series, most of them are kind of based around science in some kind of fiction. But one of the books that you have is the science of serial killers. So how come you kind of like were drawn to that one? And was it different kind of working on that one, you know, when it's based around sort of real life crime compared to sort of like some of the others which are more fantasy based?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm a huge, like, I've always been interested in true crime. This one was definitely different for us. We came into it knowing that it was a tightrope that we were walking, and it was really important to Kelly and I that we didn't do anything that was offensive to victims. We're not looking to put serial killers on pedestals. You know, a lot of people like to act like Ted Bundy was so cool and like Machiavellian, but he was just a loser. So, you know, that's something that we really wanted to focus on, but I'll let Kelly keep going.
Also, it seemed like the next logical step, because as we were working, this was our fourth book, as we were doing the research, we kept finding out that so many horror movies and so many villains, fictional villains, were based on real serial killers. And so we wanted to do that research and show the science and history behind these real people, but as Meg said, uplift those victims and tell their stories, so that, you know, that we can get that perspective out.
Cool.
Yeah. So what is the difference between, for example, I know this is a series, so they're named similarly. You have like the science of witchcraft, and then it'll say the truth behind, and it names a bunch of different kinds of fictional witches, and the science between behind science of serial killers, and we have the list. So we can kind of assume this is like the truth about them. Then we have like the science of Agatha Christie. Is this the same kind of thing, like the truth behind her, the things that people don't know, or are these books in any way like different expectations for readers?
I think obviously the topics are different, and so we approach them a little bit different. One thing that, I should say, it's Stephen King and Agatha Christie. We were focused on the books, not films. But otherwise, all the other ones were, even serial killers, we start with a film. Like, for instance, serial killers, we talk about the movie Rope. And then we go, which is a phenomenal Alfred Hitchcock movie, yeah. And then we learn about Leopold and Loeb, what it's based off of, who are real people. And so with Agatha Christie, we take the Orient Express, Murder on the Orient Express, and then while we're learning about the actual Orient Express, we're talking about the fiction that she's writing. Obviously, we get into Hercule Poirot and, his sort of effect on the world. But we also get into people who actually have come to harm on trains and things like that. So we start with that fiction as kind of like our starting point, and then we go from there. And then we're also adding in biography, which is really fun with the Stephen King and Agatha Christie as well.
And with every book, we find a thread of science. It's a question that as we're watching the movie, looking at the book or the TV show, you find a scientific aspect and then you start researching that. And sometimes you go down a rabbit hole you did not expect, and you end up writing a chapter or interviewing an expert that you had no idea would come into play. But that's what we do. And it's been so fascinating to learn and then to share that knowledge with our readers in a fun and approachable way.
That's so wonderful. Talking about research, when you do the science of Agatha Christie, the science of Stephen King, when they're actually named people in these books, do you actually get to speak to these people as well as just research what's going on behind the scenes, or how does that work? Have you tried to get interviews with them, or have you actually done that?
Well, with Stephen King, if we were going to talk to Stephen King, we wanted to do it the proper way, and unfortunately that just never came about. But we did talk the interviews in the book. We talked to Richard Chismar, who wrote the Gwendy series with Stephen King, and they're very good friends. And so that was a really cool experience to be like, what is it like co-writing a book with Stephen King? And so that was very fun, and we got to do a book event with him as well. So he's a really cool guy, and it felt like, okay, we didn't get to talk to Stephen King, but we definitely got to have somebody on board with us who was definitely much in his team. So that felt good. And then, with Agatha Christie, obviously she's long gone, but we're finding so many cool people to talk to who, costume designers, and oh my gosh, so many different types of people. And so we just do our best to really like fill each book with interviews with people who care. I know with our Stephen King book, we talked to lots of Stephen King fans, which was really fun.
And it's always different perspectives. Sometimes it's filmmakers, sometimes it's fellow writers, sometimes it's law enforcement, sometimes it's actors who portrayed a serial killer, for example. And just getting into that mindset and learning from their perspective has been so fulfilling.
Just got a comment here from Juan. It says, good evening, ladies. Just curious if Stephen King has endorsed your book or reached out regarding the science of the Stephen King book. If not, what do you think he would say? And then she goes on to say, get out of my head, Richard. Oh, I'm not sure what that comes from.
Yeah, no, you know what? I haven't heard Stephen King's thoughts on our book. I think he would say, keep on writing, ladies. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and one thing I know some people are afraid when they see that we're talking about the science of these beloved books or movies, they say, oh, I don't want to read it because I don't want you to ruin it for me. And we're not ruining anything. If anything, we're enhancing it because we love these movies and these books. And so we're saying, hey, guess what? The real story or the real science that this is based on is actually like maybe scarier than fiction. And so I think it just enhances your viewing or your reading of the book.
Absolutely. You know what I think would be so cool is if your publisher or Stephen King's publisher could arrange to have you guys do signings at the same time together. So he's selling his Stephen King books, and you're beside them selling the science to Stephen King. That would be amazing.
That sounds good to us.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can arrange that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just on that note, as a fantasy author, I do a lot of Renfest, like medieval fairs and stuff like that, where I sell my books, and that's my crowd. They love my stuff. So this is actually your time of year. We're coming into October, so I guess horror can happen any time of year, but it seems everything happens around October 31st. So are there events that you guys can actually go to actually sell your books that is themed to horror?
Yeah, we have so many events coming up. We've had some already starting a couple weeks ago and going all the way through November. One of the things that we get to do with our book, The Science of Witchcraft, we're actually going to Salem, Massachusetts, and we get to be at a couple of places there signing books at events. And that's just a dream. Neither of us has been to Salem, so we're super excited.
Yeah,
awesome.
That's definitely the one, probably top on the list. But
Salem would be awesome.
Yes. Oh, thanks, Wanda. And we're going to our favorite horror bookshop, which is open all year, but of course this is the best time of year to visit. Dark Delicacies in LA. It's an awesome bookshop, and we've worked with them before, so we'll be there as well. And oh my gosh, just so many things. But yeah, this next couple of months is our time to shine. So we love it. This is my favorite time of year, and I'm definitely looking forward to Salem the most, though. I'm bringing like an empty suitcase to fill up all the things I'm going to buy there. I'm sure.
That's awesome. That'll be fun.
So you have a podcast called Horror Rewind. Could you tell us a little bit about that and kind of like perhaps some of the guests and topics that you cover on that?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, we were driving down to actually, I think it was a Walking Dead convention where Meg was going to sell her books. We hadn't written anything yet together. And we were saying, all we do is talk about horror movies and these topics of, the real science behind everything. Why don't we start a podcast and start talking about this weekly? We started with our favorite horror movies from our childhood to watch them through a current lens and see if they lived up to our expectations, or if it was really good, or if it was just nostalgia. And I think we were kind of split 50-50. It's like sometimes it's like, oh, that was actually, I just loved it because I was a kid. But now we've transitioned to talking more about those topics that we write about, and we talk about more current things as well.
Very cool. So I saw, Kelly, I saw on your About page, it says that you are passionate about female representation in all media, and particularly the horror genre. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I want to see female characters represented in horror, and not just as their longstanding tropes, but as complicated women. It doesn't have to be always a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, although I love Buffy. But sometimes we need that Wendy character from The Shining, who was strong in her own way. And so Meg and I just got to watch Pearl last weekend, and I think that was a really good example of a female character who is not necessarily likable, but it's a great representation in the genre.
Yeah, fantastic.
So I know you have a new book coming out. When is that releasing? Is that releasing shortly? And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about it on the show.
That's Science of Witchcraft, and that came out September 6th. So.
Okay, so it's already out, yeah. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? I'm actually very interested in that because that's a research trip I wanted to do to England, and COVID shut that trip down. So I hope to get there next year. But
yeah, I would love to be able to do some like on-site research. So Science of Witchcraft, we started with films, as we do in our other books, and we start going down the rabbit hole. So, we talk to, there's a great horror movie, and of course not all witch movies are horror movies. Obviously I'm drawn to the horror ones, but we talked to these two brothers who made a movie called The Wretched, which was amazing, scary witch movie. But then we also talk about Glinda the Good Witch. So we go all over the place, and obviously we get into a lot of history, which I was fascinated by. And Kelly and I, when we started writing science of women in horror, we touched about on witches, but we kind of knew there was so much information it could be its own book.
Yeah, and one of the topics, one of the threads that we pulled, we were writing about Sleepy Hollow, and they're always talking about witch potions and all of these things from nature that are that witches use in their cauldron. And so we spoke to an indigenous ethnobotanist, and she taught us about how for generations all of these plants have been used for real healing and real things, and it's science based. And a lot of times we dismiss some of these things as, oh well, now we have medicine so we can dismiss it, but really getting back to the root of how medicines are created, it was a fascinating look at like I said, some things that sometimes people dismiss because women were involved with it generations ago.
You included sorry. Go ahead,
Christy.
You included is it Sabrina the Teenage Witch? I saw Sabrina. Is it Sabrina?
Yeah, it's the chilling. We talked about the
so we
chilling
have
Sabrina. Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. With someone like Sabrina and Glinda, like what is the focus there? Because that is just, I'm automatically interested because it's not what I would think of for writing this type of book.
So when we were talking about Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, actually the thread that we pulled and talked about was we spoke to a woman who was running her own mortuary and went to college and didn't think that maybe this was the route that she was going down, but learned that it was really a way to connect with people and to really empathize with people and help them through the most difficult time of their lives. And so looking at death in that way and looking at this practice as not morbid, but really as an empathy-based, giving back and a communication-based profession, that really taught us a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And like as far as like Glinda and things like that, it's kind of fun to sort of, Kelly was talking about complicated female characters, and witches are often put in sort of two categories. There's the Glinda, and then there's the evil witch of the West, right? The Wicked Witch. So it's kind of interesting how witches, by sort of definition in media, are these two very polar opposite things. But really, women who were, found to be witches, so to speak, in history, were just human beings who are complicated and real. And so it's kind of an interesting dichotomy of like the tropes that we see on screen and the reality of women and men who were, executed for being a witch. Very interesting.
And I think too, the examples of you mentioned the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz, and then I would bring up Maleficent through prequels like Wicked the musical, and then the Maleficent movie starring Angelina Jolie. We find out through their backstories that maybe some of their actions were justified or not justified. It explains why they were acting the way they were acting. It doesn't excuse their behavior, but it explains it. So I think that too is fascinating, and we wrote about that in the book.
I don't know if you read this. There was an article by Isaac Asimov on witchcraft, and he I believe it was called The Wicked Witch is Dead. And he was kind of exploring why we came up with this legend of witches and what caused it to end. And he came to the conclusion that it was probably dentistry. Because like when women lose their teeth, it's like their jaws collapse and their noses seem to hook, and so therefore you end up with a witch. When men age, they lose their teeth, but they used to kind of like have big beards, so you didn't really see much of a difference. And so his kind of like sort of like theory was that maybe it was, kind of like down to the fact that of modern dentistry that kind of like the witches died, as it were, so to speak. I don't know if that was something that you might be interested in.
It always comes down to looks, doesn't it? It always
and the patriarchy.
And the patriarchy.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised at all. That's great. I haven't heard that one, so that's funny.
That's why I'm growing my beard now, Dave. I had to shave it off at the library we did the other week, but it's coming back. So now that Witchcraft is out, what's next for you guys? I see we're coming to the end of the show, and I just want to plug your whatever your next project is. I know you guys have a lot of stuff you're doing as far as events go until you get past Halloween, so I imagine it's a very busy time for you. But going forward past Halloween, what's next with Kelly and Meg, individually and together?
Yeah, so our next book is The Science of Agatha Christie, coming out in 2023. And actually next week we have a reading of a screenplay that's been nominated. And it's called Hellcats, and it's about witches. Go figure.
Yeah, we're really excited about that. We wrote it together, and it's a horror comedy, but it takes place in 1692. And yeah, we've been getting into screenplay writing, and it's really fun. And we have a charity event coming up this Thursday in Duluth, Minnesota, at the Nordic Center, and we are partnered with Safe Haven. We're giving away the copies of our first 4 books for people who bring in donations. So
Nice.
I'm really excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, check our websites. You can also go to horrorrewind.com, and we have an event calendar up there if people want to see if we're going to be in their area.
Cool.
That's awesome. So how do people find you then if they're looking for your books?
We're anywhere you buy books. Go visit your local independent bookstore, of course, and you can always request us there. Go to your library. Otherwise, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever you buy your books.
And are you guys exclusive to Amazon, or are you on all the readers?
No, we're on all the readers.
You're wide. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, too, for being on the show today. All of a sudden, the time just flew by on the Witch's Bloom. It was amazing, and we really appreciate just listening to it. And actually, I'm interested in the science of witchcraft. So like I say, I'm doing some research on witchcraft because my universe is going to start with a witch. So I'm very interested in finding out more, and I might have to check that book out.
I see the question, can I get signed books? And you can DM us on any of our social media, and we'll be happy to send you a book.
Yeah, DM us if you want to sign book, Wanda. We're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all the things.
That's awesome. I might have to get a signed book too and put it in my library.
Oh, awesome.
So before we go, I just want to ask Christy, A.F. Stewart saying this is a great interview. Christy, what's new on the Christy Stratos stratosphere?
Had the next episode of Corrupted Magic out this week. Yay. So this one is, let's see, episode 9. I want to say episode 9. I'm sorry if that's wrong. It's called A Damaged Ship. And I meant to tell you last week what the episode was called. It was called In Harm's Way. And we're making our way up to some big, big stuff in there. A lot of action, a lot of psychology and dark stuff going on, and lots of magic too. So yeah, for sure. It's not as dark as horror like for Kelly and Meg, but it's definitely psychologically dark. So I hope you guys will take a look at that. And again, that is on Patreon and on Kindle Vella, which you find on Amazon. So you can read the first 3 episodes for free always. So that is what is up with me. How about you, David?
Well, most of the last week I've spent traveling, so there's not a lot of change for me. I'm progressing with the second Hyperion Jones novel, but It's been a little bit slow this last week. But I will be getting back on it tomorrow. So.
Okay, and I was sorry, I don't mean to look away. We had someone drop out on our show for next week, and so we were left with a blank, and I reached out just before we went on air tonight, and I just want to make sure that they got back to me, and they have. So it looks like we're going to have David Ellis and Sindren Moreau, and I don't have a lot of information on them, but we've had Sindren on before, and she was a great interviewee, so she will be our guest next week. And with what's new with me, I just came back from a Royal Medieval Fair on the weekend. It was amazing, and I just picked up this book in Toronto. This is my latest release, book 14 in the Soulforge universe. It's finally out. It's almost 700 pages, and it's massive. So I can't hold that up very long. I'm going to get tired. But yeah, the cool thing, and you guys can all relate, as authors, there's highs and there's lows with doing the job, and it can be lonely sometimes, and you doubt yourself a lot of times. And every now and then, something very special happens, and that happened to me today. I came home we're dealing with a sick cat, so I came home from the vet, and my wife pointed out this thing on Instagram that someone who bought my books and read them. He's actually a painter, and he painted this scene here, and it's done in oil, it's canvas, and it doesn't mean anything to you guys, but on here it says Grimelda. It's a gravestone. It's kind of fitting with you guys here, but it's a gravestone, and that's a Raven Raver. He's a character in one of my books, and he's sitting on Grimelda's gravestone, tombstone, And I was so taken by that I got a hold of him, and luckily he lives close by. So I actually drove there, and I paid him for his painting and everything else. So I have the original frame, but it was no collaboration between us. He just wanted to do that because he loved my story. So I was so touched, and that really made my day. And it's things like that to make being an author an amazing job. Because there are so many days that we have self-doubt and everything else, why are we doing this? But then you get that, and that just fuels you to keep going. So
that's awesome.
What's the artist's name?
Pardon me?
What's the artist's name?
His name is Jason Tench. And he's just starting to get. Well, I'm not going to get into the story. He's got a long story that's is very touching. If I was to tell you, I found out about it today, and I was quite shocked. But very interesting individual, and I was very touched that he actually did that for me. So that's amazing. Anyway, thank you too for being on the show. We really appreciate it. It was really cool learning about your stuff, and this is pretty well you're setting up October for us. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks for having us.
We had so much fun.
So for Christy, David, and myself, until we meet again, take good care.
Good night.